This is amazing. I have been attending Tuesday group the last 2 weeks to kind of get a sense of like what the vibe is. And I pictured like 5 people out in the audience because all I could see was the speaker. And I'm blown away. And it matches how blown away I was by the number of folks who were at the film last night, in large part to see those amazing panelists. So thank you for being here. Thank you to Friends of the Boundary Waters for getting me out here and getting to revisit this whole journey, like revisiting our tripping experiences. I'm sure many of us like do that, and it fills us up and nourishes us long into the future. Thanks for this Boundary Waters Connect, because as I mentioned briefly last night, the original purpose of this film, once NRS, Northwest River Supply, came on board as a corporate sponsor, the original purpose was to take this film on a national summer tour of 2020, which of course blew up. And it was about community and connecting communities that are adjacent to waterways with the paddling and boater communities. So many places in the West, there's a lot of tension and friction. I don't feel any of that in Ely, where everybody is a paddler that I've met. So it's really bringing an experience for me related to this film of it sort of achieving its mission. And it's kind of crazy 6 years later. So really cool opportunity. When I asked Lacey about ideas of like, what do people want to listen to? She, threw me a big target of, how did you get into making the film? And do you have paddling history? And how did you get into this? So we're going to kind of go down that river and go to various spots, and I'll try to leave enough space at the end for questions. There were some good questions. There was a question last night I have an answer for. So those of you, stay tuned. Let me see the clicker. I'm the producer of Wood on Water. This is Hannah Maya. Those of you who saw the film know her well now. She was the director, main photographer. And how this film started, I'm going to quote actually an article that was in The Guardian. We did get some publicity in this paddling world. And The Guardian, Hannah is quoted as saying, in her wonderful British accent, she says, "As with most of life's grand adventures, the seeds of it were planted many moons ago," after which she then talks about getting an email from this woman in America. So the seed for me, I think, where it first began, long before Hannah came into my database as even existing, was when I sent my daughter at age 15 to Keewaydin. She wanted to go. And she came home, and we were going to do a college trip. It's August, and we're in a rental car. And the first thing that just made me stop is she grabbed her trash as we got out of the car. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like it was remarkable to not be the one saying, why don't you take your trash? And then a little later on that trip, we were on a run. She was getting into running, getting ready for soccer season. I'm a runner. And we were on a run, and there was a little bit of a little trickle of water, like a drainage. And I just jumped over it because I'm a Coloradoan whose main principle and mission is to keep your feet dry. Keep your feet dry, drilled in. And she stomped through it. And I literally stopped and just started laughing. Oh my gosh, how could I have raised this child in Colorado and she just ran through water that she didn't need to run through? So that was, I think, the first seed. And then when she said to me, hey, Mom, they have an adult canoe trip. I think you'd really like it. That was the other piece of like, oh my gosh, my adolescent daughter wants me to share in this thing she's doing. And like, it felt like she loved it so much that she thought I'd love it too. It's like, well, absolutely. Yes, I'm going to go. But I don't know how many of you spent time in Colorado. I am not native to Colorado, but I went as an adolescent and fell in love with it. Formative experience. To be up and high and to have vast vistas with mountain ranges and to have bluebird days, day after day after day after day, that is what lifts me up and gives me the feeling that we heard from all those panelists last night. It also is, you have to be super organized. You have to be really efficient. You get padded waist belts and you get padded shoulder straps. So you can get super comfy while streamlining. And everything is like a system. So, cooking is really minimal. This was a more recent trip where I got into like having the, alcohol stove that you had open flame, and you can get really geeky about it. So this is sort of where I came from. But then I had children, and it doesn't work so well to do that with young children. And I also became a single mother. And I realized that I really wanted to be able to get out with other families, most of whom were two-parent households with big fifth wheel trailers. And I wanted to be able to like have community and get in the outdoors. So we did that. And the community in Colorado with young children is often like bluegrass festivals and, events that are outside. And that was really fun, but it didn't take me long to realize it didn't give me what being in the outdoors did for me. It was like going to Lincoln Center in New York City. Like, it was crowded, there was a lot of noise. Nobody was living simply. They were hauling everything, including pillows. Pillows. It wasn't what I was looking for. So I found myself just heading out alone with my kids and getting into the high country and having to do a lot of hard work as a single mom of young kids to make this outdoor experience happening. But I loved it so much. And we got more and more remote, and we had Utah next door. And that was working for me. It was like, well, now, I don't know if you guys see a lot of those Sprinter vans. Vans are pretty sophisticated now. This Volkswagen van is not that. It doesn't have the kitchen. I pull out a camp stove. I have my whole camp kitchen set up. It is not that. So I kind of figure it's sort of like, ultralight backpacking in the van world. It really worked. And I could upgrade my kitchen gear. Coffee got a little better. It was really fun. And Bluebird days. These vans at the time, when I was looking for used vans, a lot of them were Seattle, and they had these awnings for rain. I bought my van a year old. It rarely saw rain. It was a shade awning. That is the formative experience of my childhood and adult life. I also then had friends who had young children who were really into river rafting, and that was something I didn't do in my childhood home of Missouri. And it gave me the community experience that I had wanted for my kids that the van didn't accomplish, because I relied on them for their gear, and all the kids, would pile into one person's raft, and one parent would be there, giving snacks and making sure they drank water and got sunscreen. So there was that community experience of raising children together in the outdoors, which is missing in my van trips. And then my children, like, they had these community of little friends, and they had lots of leisure time hanging out. And it was like the parents were kind of doing all the work, but we were doing it as a tribe of parents. And then the kids were just, they had no toys, they had no nothing, and they never got bored. And they navigated like how to share sticks and dig holes. And yet we still could get out on these inflatable duckies, and we could still get alone time and get quiet away from the group. And days were spent taking little hikes to stay cool. Caring for your body in this climate is so different than caring for your body up here. And so we would go up these crevices. This is the San Juan River. We'd go up these crevices, and we'd be soaking in water and playing and cooling down and bathing. It was really delightful. And then kids got bigger. And so the rivers got bigger, and they were competent and were independent together. And it really was the experience of living on a trip instead of passing through an environment. And I hear that again and again in stories from you all. It was really beautiful, and it was a comfortable place to be uncomfortable for me. It was about protecting yourself from sun. And so as the experiences got bigger, the tools got bigger. And you're finding shade crammed up like a snake against the rock, or like wearing draped clothing and getting under a tree wherever there was a tree, and lots of sitting in water. Like it is enforced leisure to be in a desert trip. And sometimes you had to lay in water because it was so shallow. And then there was such community for adults, for kids, and the cooking setup, because you're in those big fluffy rafts. You could take amazing cook gear, have amazing meals, all collaborated, an incredible community. So that's how I raised my kids to adolescence. And then the Keewaydin way came our way. And my daughter, who I witnessed these transformations of my values, pick up your trash and take it out of the car, with a culture of running straight through the water instead of leaping over it. It's like, what is that? And so I decided to take her up on her suggestion, which then puts me at end season when they paddle in, which also seemed like my daughter wants me there. When I was sent to camp, you didn't want your parents anywhere near it. So my adventure started. Now, I knew some things about Canada because I, have some well-read tendencies, and I knew there was a lot of water, and I knew there were a lot of bugs. And I will say the film last night, I love it because that scene with the bugs, people email me about they loved the film and that scene with the bugs. And it got a nice little laugh. And then I knew there was a lot of rain. But, I looked back, I had one photo of my kids with rain with our van. So a lot of rain is sort of a relative principle. And the skies were so beautiful. And they reminded me of the big open skies of Colorado. But I was on a 2-week trip that had half a rest day. It was quite intense. And I found myself with landscapes like this, where the clouds were hovering around the horizon. I started intentionally hallucinating my mountain line. And I started pretending those clouds were mountains just to give myself some comfort of oh, I'm moving towards that, which surprised me actually that I would do that. And, I was thinking about how we have these trails. Look at those great trails, mountain trails, desert trails. And then we have these sweet little bridges that sometimes exist where you can cross the river and not get your feet wet. So this is what Keewaydin was. This is what my trip was. Very far from those dry feet days. And this is what it was too, very far from those dry feet days. And so, instead of laying there in your tent and your feet are all happy, or you're focused on adding moisture into your feet in the desert, because them cracking and splitting and bleeding and then getting infected is what you're thinking about. It wasn't. It was wrinkly, wet, bring your, what is it, Gold Bond foot powder, get them dry. And then the tools were so different, of course. The Keewaydin way uses tools that include the roll, which is tumped, which of course you carry from your head down your back. But the rolls I loved because it was a system that I could totally make sense out of. And I love it. And I'm always asking people who boat, do you do a roll? Do you do it this way? Because I think that really stuck with me. And then there are the wanigans, which themselves weigh 35 pounds, which while it's in a canoe is just dandy. And it was pretty neat that you could have all this real food instead of dehydrating your food. Loved that until it came time to carry it from your head. And then these canoes, really beautiful. Now, in case someday somebody from that Keewaydin women's trip listens to this, I want to be really clear. They did not give us adult women these beautiful wood canvas canoes because 1, they're fragile, and 2, we never could have portaged them. But I had an appreciation for these canoes, and I'm sorry, even the high-end, beautiful canoes that we got to carry were still really heavy. But these wood canvas canoes are 80 pounds, and I've even heard people say that when they're wet, because there is that absorption of these natural materials, they're 100 pounds. I believe it. And you carry them from your head. And I was clarifying with some folks who are here that saw the movie last night who have carried wood canvas canoes. There is a tump line. And in the film, we see the kids getting their tumps onto their canoes. So there's both the tump line and the wood bar, and then the kids would take the wood, or not the wood, the wool jackets, and they'd bunch them up on their shoulders to try to give themselves some padding. So that's how they would carry those wood canvas canoes. Now, we had a half-day rest day. It was grueling. Thank goodness it was partly sunny. This is the only picture I have of anyone laying down. And it was a total photo op. I took a picture, this other person's taking a picture. It was really intense. It was very intense. And the food, also great systems, really cool, efficient. But before you can take in the fuel you need for your body, you have to expend a lot of work. You're chopping down dead trees, you're splitting the wood, you're sawing, and then you're feeding, getting the fire up to a nice coal-banked flame to cook your food. And then the food itself actually is meant for teenagers. It's like really cheesy, carb-loaded pizza and sugar and incredible bacon, best bacon I've ever had. Really great. And there was community. And what's interesting about this trip is I came away and told my friends in Colorado, like, I've already got my character built. I don't need to go out for 2 weeks and build more character like that. Like I'm 40. And what was interesting about my canoe trip with these women is I admired them so much because I was living an outdoor lifestyle where I actually was, weaving in and out of nature daily and exercising in nature daily. And most everyone except the trip guides who were with us, helping us, they were in professions on the East Coast. And this really was like adult camp for them. And I was in awe of them actually, because I was suffering like, you can be outside and not do it this way. My little internal voice was saying, and I was like, wow. And these women, and most of them had done it for the previous couple of summers. I was super impressed by them. And what it was to experience hardship like that in a group of women. We had hardship on the Grand Canyon. The wind would blow and the sand would just blast you, and we'd actually haul water to cover the entire camp area so that the sand wouldn't blow. So it's not like they were cushy trips, but the type of adversity was just so different. So by the time I got back to Keewaydin and the kids are paddling in, I saw my children in their groups, their sections, in a totally different way. I knew what they had done and they'd done together and how imperfect everyone was, and yet they were so cohesive that I get shivers, like I just got shivers. That was actually the next greatest seed for this film, was having experienced this and seeing what it was like for my kids with their sections in the couple of days on island that happen after they paddle in. And not just with their sections, but the entire camp. And that people, elderly who had done this as children, who didn't have trippers still coming in, if they could come for end season and participate in this paddle in and the few days, they were there. It was so intergenerational, from babies to people with canes. And it was all to welcome these young people back in. So that was it. Soon after that experience, I was at a film festival in my hometown of Carbondale, Colorado, and this film by Hannah Maya won the People's Choice Award. Highly recommend watching it. It's shorter, it's 20 minutes. It's called My Big White Thighs and Me. Everybody loves it, all ages, all genders. And she won People's Choice. And from the film, I was like, she could tell the story of these women. Now, I'm as impressed by men who are doing it, and that my son at age 15 did this. I'm, still stunned. But it was this women's story that I felt was so potent for my daughter to have the opportunity to do, and I wanted people to know about it. And so I waited for her to get back to England because she was in Carbondale, Colorado, and I emailed her, and we literally started working on it like the day after she responded. And I always thought it's so interesting, as I had forgotten this. I didn't go out intending to produce a film. I wanted her to make this film. That's what I wanted. I wanted her to make this film. And I just kept thinking, at some point she's going to take it and run, or somebody else is going to step in and do it. And we just day by day continued making this film together, which is pretty amazing. Funding was the biggest part. I'm going to breeze through the filmmaking and leave time at the end so that people can ask questions if that's your particular interest. But, it was all new learning for me. It was all new skills and techniques and tools, Kickstarter campaigns. In the US, my biggest work was finding funders. And so we had NRS came on board. I mean, I talked to REI, every connection I could find, I pursued. NRS came on board. I met them at the Canoetopia up in Madison, made that connection, and they were phenomenal. And then these other in-kind donors so that we could put them as gifts, as awards for our Kickstarter campaign. And then we made our own swag, and I pulled out that pin from the buried in my jewelry box. We made our own swag that was part of the Kickstarter campaign, in which we also sold on the island to generate excitement, and people were very excited. Toronto, Hannah flew. We flew Hannah to this continent quite a bit, actually. So it was expensive, but she went to this canoe and wilderness symposium, and she spoke there in 2019. And then that article that was in The Guardian actually had been excerpted from the book that was in production, and that book came out called Tough Women Adventure Stories. And then Paddling Magazine did a online link to our video to promote the film. The Kickstarter campaign is still open, and there's some neat information on that too. Just flag it if you're interested. So that long before we ended up on the canoe trip, the biggest partner in our section, I feel like we had a documentary section, was Bruce Ingersoll from the Keewaydin camps. He was camp director. It turned out to be his final summer, 2019, the summer we filmed, was his last summer as camp director.
Unknown caller.
The film could have ever happened without him. The three of us had to navigate so many logistics. I mean, they took Hannah with their teenagers.
Yes.
Remarkable. And it wasn't sight unseen.
From Rockies, they like watch.
Prior.
You like resort, I'm sorry.
Resort, yeah.
It was a nice cameo in the film, but it really, the three of us, I feel like, really navigated things. And then while Hannah was on trip, I was on the island, and there were all sorts of crazy things, like this one tripper whose shoulder became dislocated and had to come off trip. And then, you know, there's lots of great backstory, but the three of us together just shared every leg of that stool of work. And then we got to be on the island, and Hannah was on trip. Now that's all I'm going to say about the filmmaking. Again, we can have more questions, but the pandemic was our launch year. We did end up having a nice representation of film festivals, some of which were online, some of which were in person, and then culminating in this weekend, which was such a gift, unexpected. And then another nice surprise was that the Canadian Canoe Museum, which opened in 2024, had seen Hannah at the canoe symposium, the Canoe and Wilderness Symposium, and they reached out to us asking for a small edit from the film. So we made a small clip, which was there at the opening and has its own little display, which now, this was the opening weekend. It now does have a nameplate for it. So if you go up there, please find it. And the way I think of this film now is very much as having been on trip, which I never would have arrived at had I not been on trip for 2 weeks. How important it is that when you're carrying a heavy load, you are in community. I mean, this was the panel last night. Community matters. And sometimes the view, even while you're just so weighted, sometimes the view is what keeps you going. And you may be far away from your section mates, but they're there. And that you come up on these miracles of nature. Phenomenal. There was a wolf on this trip too, but by the time Hannah got her camera, it was gone. Really amazing. And the quiet of just sitting there watching and experiencing that with others is so much more profound somehow, or different maybe, than watching it yourself. And that you're helping each other stone by stone, and all you get is like the next stone that's in front of you. And I love that they're trying to keep their feet dry, because I know their shoes are already soaking wet. So it's kind of fun to have that perspective now. And there is something about being alone in nature that really resonates with me. And I love that even on this trip, Hannah and I were separate and we had each other's back, and I was carrying my load by myself, and I knew she was carrying it herself. It's just, again, shivers. It just was really a great experience. And then sometimes the river's carrying you, and you just get to like look around and enjoy the beauty of where you've landed. Now there's this, those of you who saw the film, saw this slide, it always gets a chuckle. Hannah says in her wonderful, exhausted British accent, I'm so hungry. And all we've got is flippin' raisins. And revisiting the slide, I encountered on a podcast, a New York Times podcast, just the other day in March, in this month. There is the New York Times food critic, just retired from 13 years as the food critic because of health complications, because of the way he was eating. And he opened up his interview with that mindfulness meditation. I don't know if any of you have heard it, where you spend 20 minutes eating a raisin. You look at it and you look at its color and you might smell it and you might feel its texture, bringing yourself really into the present moment. And then, you put it in your mouth and you notice the taste, and maybe you move it around your tongue to get all the different taste sensors. 20 minutes. And this man had to rearrange his relationship to food because of these health issues. So he led this podcast with that. And I'm a spiritual care provider. So I know the raisin meditation, but I hadn't thought of it with this clip from the film. And I thought, that's exactly why I didn't like that trip. Is we had no time to slowly eat the raisin. It was like, I am famished and all we've got is raisins, so I better shove as many as I can in. And then being an adult, before I went to this camp for 2 weeks for my own trip, I asked the camp director, Bruce, I said, so Bruce, there's coffee, right? I can't go if there's not coffee. It really was a deal breaker for me. And he's like, oh yeah, there's coffee, absolutely. Well, on trip, because this is the Keewaydin way, and we were doing it like the kids do it, they wouldn't let us have coffee until we had completely finished our roll, taken down our tent, and had everything on the beach ready for departure. And I was just like, I'm an adult. And I need some agency here. But no, I couldn't have my coffee until I had that. So I was a little bit like, I'm an adult and I need some agency. And it reminded me, as I was thinking about that from this raisin clip, I was thinking of Hannah's husband. British guy, as you saw in the film, he came over from England to be on island when she came off. And he was always like, so Max, it's kind of a cult here. You're going to help me get her out again, right? And I was thinking there is a cult about the way they do things. You have to do it the certain way. And I wasn't buying the coffee thing. I wasn't buying the raisin thing. I wanted to slowly enjoy my meal. So it added to my laughter with that. The other interesting thing is just this month, the New York Times had an article about this new book that's out. So one of the questions I had, which I wanted answered by this film, is not only do I respect what these kids do, but why do my kids who are raised in Colorado want to go back? Why would they want to keep doing this? And what was funny when this came out, this article from the New York Times, this parenting expert thinks your kids need more fire and knives. And I went, did she go to Keewaydin? Because, they sure had fire and they sure had knives. And yeah, that's totally true. But there's a secret that's not in the film that gets me emotional even now as I revisited pictures from this talk or to prepare this talk. And it's what happens at that program at the end of trip. And what it is a paddle in, which I already touched on. People are on island. It's a very choreographed entry so that the long trip kids, who are the older kids, come in at the end so that all the young campers are there gathered around with all the parents who are there, with all the grandparents and people who they don't even know are there gathered around. And when they get close enough, everyone's on the island, they yell out this ritualized chant. And it's so tribal. It's like, our young people have gone out for this experience and they're announcing their return. And then the people on the island do the exact same chant back to them, welcoming them back. And then they paddle in, and the skills they learned, like the way the bowman jumps out of the boat, to gently bring the wood canvas canoe ashore. They're so masterful. It's beautiful. They've been doing it 1,000 times over 40 and 50 days. And the island stays completely silent while they unload their canoes and set them on shore, and while they raise the canoes and set them on racks. And once that last canoe gets set on the rack, everybody erupts. And the kids are hugging each other, and all the campers who they knew from previous years and end seasons are all rushing them in. And then there's, of course, all the greeting of the parents. And it's powerful. And I'd never encountered anything like it and didn't even know I longed for it. And when I was there, it's so elemental that if anything, in sending my kids up there, that I didn't know they'd come away with, this is an experience I'm so glad they came away with, and I'm really glad I did as well. And then there's a couple days where there's, some, basically knife throwing, right? You're showing off your canoe skills, and there's a little bit of competition around it amongst the campers, and it's, super fun. But then the final night before everyone goes home, there's a final campfire. And it starts while the sun is, while it's still light out. It's a huge bonfire that then builds. And each section tells stories from their trip. And by the time it gets to the older kids, the individual kids get up. And by then it's dark. And my kids, who don't like being the center of attention, never had any experience public speaking, looked at the fire the whole time, telling their story. And they were held by the community. And every long tripper is held that way, telling their story, a story from their trip. You hear about bears, you hear about people lost, you hear these amazing stories. And then it's night, and you're holding all these stories. And when all of the stories are done, something again, especially as a single mom, but I imagine most parents feel this way, you want wisdom to come to them from others. And so often, the way we disperse as families, there aren't the elders around them to give them wisdom, but this camp provides it. And the person who provided it while my kids were there was Bruce Ingersoll, who was part of our documentary section. And he reads a letter that he reads every year called When You Go Home Tomorrow. Well, I'm going to read it, but I can't read it from there. When you go home tomorrow, these are habits to live by. It's a longer letter. I'm boiling it down to the habits to live by. You've been really organized. You've been thorough. You've been prepared. You have taken care of yourselves in basic ways. You have trusted people with your lives. You've learned to do without, and you've persevered at really difficult things. You've learned to use new tools, and you took care of what you had with you, learning to mend what you have and throw away as little as possible, what Wendell Berry calls the true materialist. And he says to everybody there, you lived simply. Please continue to do so. There's no substitute for that kind of sanity. And as I look back at this, I realize, that's what I was seeking. Those are the values that I wanted to share with my kids every time I got them out in nature, whether it was by a van trip or whether it was with families on the river. And that for them to hear that from an elder who they respected, which everybody on the island, you respect everyone ahead of you. It's phenomenal how tangible that is. And then the last thing he does is he calls everyone from these long trips to lead the camp in this ritualized closing song. And I'm going to play just a few seconds of it for you. Could you hear that? Oh, good. So, when I heard the panel last night, almost to a person and with using different language, everyone was saying that they feel so called to be out in nature and in the wilderness. And that the reason it boils down to is that it's then not about them, right? Like it's about me that I want to go out into the woods, but I want to go out there because then it's not about me. It's bigger and vaster and I'm small and I feel connected to something bigger. That's what I feel like this journey for me in the film and in my own life has been about me, but it's been so much bigger than me. And I was thinking about the cairns we have in Colorado. They're kind of like sloppy, right? Like they're just kind of haphazard and they show you the way. And that up on Hudson Bay, my daughter brought me a pendant from her Hudson Bay trip that was a Inukshuk, and I didn't know much about Inukshuks. And they're gracious and they actually point the direction to go. And I was thinking about, what is all of this worth? Like, what is this? What's the purpose of this? And I feel like these times in nature and these opportunities to get out are expressing our values, whatever the culture we're in of getting out. But it's because it's relevant today. In the West, we have lots of threats to our environment. Up here, we have lots of threats, mining being what we both share as threats to our wilderness. And I just thought, like those deliberate Inukshuk stacks, if I could just feel like this little contribution of this film is one little intentional stone that's on a Inukshuk that's kind of pointing the way. And I felt that so much in this community, that it's had meaning and has touched you, then that journey was really, really valuable, not just for me, but for others. And then I got to tell you that Pierogies down the street, I was like, okay, what is the culture here in Ely? And oh my gosh, the thought you could toss your canoe in the air, amazing. And then like, oh my gosh, you have padded shoulder belts and shoulder straps and waist belts and even cushions to put on top of your barrels to sit on. I think I would like this culture. And there were some things that were familiar from my culture: bear bells, bear sacks, water filters. So I was like, oh yeah, it's not so different. And this, where was Susie's bug net when I was up there? I didn't even know it existed, but kudos, you guys have figured it out. And so that's all of my formal presentation. These are ways you can watch the film at home, both NRS. If you Google NRS Wood on Water, you'll find it with advertisements, which is unfortunate. And then there's a shorter version, a 20-minute shortcut on Hannah's website, Maya Media. And that's kind of fun to compare the two. It's much more boiled down. But that's it. That's my presentation. Perfect time. Okay, we have a little time. Oh, good.
That was so cool.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you.
Oh, yeah. So before Q&A, for those of you there last night, someone in the audience asked, there's a scene with boxes, 32 boxes that were loading onto the seaplane for resupply. And someone asked, how much did those boxes weigh? I was like, I don't remember, but good authority, I think it's accurate, 1,200 pounds. And that's not including like the watermelon and things we got to bring in since Hannah and Cielo were on the trip. Normally it would just be the boxed foods. So 1,200 pounds for 11 folks out there. Okay, so open.
This mic is kind of loud, so you don't have to get it too close.
When the older group comes in, what is that chant, or is it different with each group?
It's not, it's the same. And so Keewaydin has, right, it has some of its native, like, I mean, it's foreign to me, but the native languages are woven in. So it's Quay, 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 Ha, Ki, K, Keewaydin, 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 woo! And it's potent, these voices coming across the water. Yeah. And I can't imagine for them coming in after 50 days just themselves.
So now that you stumbled into film production, are you sticking with it? You got more projects coming down the pike?
You know, I don't. Didn't set out to be a film producer. So I don't. And I would only work with Hannah, I think. The miracle, again, who knows? There's so much mystery that we open to when we open into spaces that are wild. But the mystery is that she and I got along so beautifully. She's that bond. In the film, one of the camp leaders interviewed one of the young women who now guides, says, that it's about these bonds formed on trip and the relationship. And the chills again. For me, that's what happened with Hannah and I. And I can't imagine, like, I didn't know the pitfalls. I didn't even expect necessarily to make a movie. But I don't think I think the chances of that happening is so rare. I've kind of floated to Hannah. She's out of filmmaking these days with 2 young children at home, and she's more into arts that don't consume her to the same degree. And I'm always like, so could we make a film about, and I'm always like tossing her ideas because I would work with her if she said, Max, I'm making a film. I want you on it. I'd be like, all right, what is it? Yeah. But otherwise.
And this is something you did outside of your day-to-day profession.
Yeah, so I was in transition. So my son had just left home, right, as a young adult, and I went back to school. I went back, got a master's of divinity. I'd been a practicing Buddhist, so the Raisin meditation was, right up my alley. And I'd gone back to divinity school, and I took a semester off when I realized how consuming this fundraising was getting. And there was a lot of help in the Keewaydin community because people really wanted this film. There hasn't been anyone capturing it. And I will say, even though there's some gender references in the film about, women not being considered strong enough when they first opened the program, everybody was so supportive of this film, really psyched to have the women as the ones captured. There wasn't any tension around that. And I was thinking about Keewaydin and Bruce giving us such access, and they're kind of an unspoken fiscal sponsor. I mean, the fact that we were able to be on the seaplane and didn't have to get a separate seaplane. Yeah. So did that answer your question?
Well, I am curious about your work in, I think, yeah.
Oh, right. It was about me, right?
I guess I'm just curious about you personally because you're bringing such a values-based and rooted approach to parenting and the wilderness, and you're so articulate about it. And I'm just so curious, like, where does that come from, and what does your faith, how did your faith guide you on this journey to both be on the trip and produce a film, which was totally new territory for you?
Such a meaningful question. So again, it's funny because one of the reasons why I like being an interfaith spiritual care provider, I work with the Red Cross now, but I've been in hospital settings. One of the reasons I love doing it is because it's really not about me, but it's all about me because it's about how I hear, listen, and how I reflect and how I kind of use myself to create, like, how is that in me when I feel this grief or loss or joy or, so I hate talking about me, but that said, it is only a spiritual experience what those kids are doing out there. It is only a spiritual experience for me when I'm in the woods. And even if someone's not using that language, spiritual is in everything from my framework. It's why I love the silence so much, is I can get past the voices in my head, the identities I have. And it's funny, it's the one thing now that I'm remembering with Hannah at the end of the film. She says, it's almost spiritual. And I kind of took her to task for that. Like, really? Almost? Why can't you just say it's spiritual? And, and it's the choice it is, and it's perfect as it is. But I think it's all spiritual to me. But I think what makes it work is that it's so elemental too. It's so embodied in a way that you get without having to reflect much about it at all. It just becomes part of you. And I preaching to the choir, probably. And I think it's why I struggled with having such an intense experience on the women's trip, is there wasn't really time to just be. There wasn't time to just really be with it. And there were a lot of, older women, they just, cha, 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 cha. I mean, these older women, I should say, cha, 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 cha. So on the canoes, it was cha, 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 cha. And it was, it was like, I like being out in the silence. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did give Max an idea for a film, and I need you all to help me persuade Max that this is a good idea. When I was sitting in the audience last night and looking around at the women that were there, it was a predominantly women audience. It was a predominantly gray-haired women audience. And those women were trailblazers. They started going into the woods on canoe trips on their own, 60 years ago? When they were considered oddballs to do that. They all had stories. There were so many stories in that auditorium. And we haven't captured those stories. And I think somebody should capture their stories now. Because it's a wonderful part of our history up here. And I don't mean to knock the guys. You're great too. I'm married. I have all sons. They're great. But the women, it's kind of a unique thing. And I'm so proud of all those women who were in that auditorium who had the guts to be different when it was hard to be different. So Max, we got to convince her. Got to get Hannah's phone number or her email and keep pushing this little bug along. And maybe we'll get a story about the women of the Quetico Superior.
That's the kind of story she would enjoy telling for sure. Yeah.
Well, we so appreciate you joining us, and I do want to thank Riley and the Friends of the Boundary Waters for bringing you to town and for making it possible that we could feature you as our Tuesday group speaker today. It's been really fun to hear from you.
It has been such a gift. It really has been such a gift. I've lived in some small towns in Colorado. And so I really get the Ely vibe totally. And it takes me back to that. And yet you all are pretty exceptional, I must say. Yeah. It's been a total joy. Thank you.